The ballroom was alive with music and laughter, the kind of night designed to remind the world who really held the power. Crystal chandeliers threw light across marble floors, glasses of champagne clinked, and the richest families of New York floated through the hall in gowns and tuxedos. Richard Vance, the man who owned the night, stood at the center with the smug smile of someone who believed nothing and no one could touch him. Then the doors opened. A woman stepped inside, not in diamonds or silk, but in a simple, elegant gown the color of midnight. No sequins, no glitter, no designer label flashing under the lights. Just a calm presence, quiet but commanding, that seemed to ripple through the crowd like a sudden gust of cold wind. Conversation died mid-sentence. The string quartet faltered. Even the waiters carrying trays slowed, their eyes locked on her. Whispers spread like fire. "Who is she? She wasn't on the guest list. She looks familiar." Richard's smile wavered. For a split second, the mask of arrogance slipped. His fingers tightened around his glass, and his eyes narrowed as if he'd seen a ghost. The woman's name was Naomi Carter, but to everyone else in that room, she was the maid. The woman who scrubbed Richard's marble floors and polished the silver in his mansion. The one he'd invited tonight for a cruel laugh. At lunch with his billionaire friends, he'd smirked as he signed her golden invitation. "Let's see how the help looks trying to blend in," he joked. They all laughed, imagining her wide eyes and clumsy steps in a world she didn't belong to. But Naomi didn't stumble. She descended the grand staircase with steady steps, her chin lifted, her eyes unwavering. She didn't fidget with her dress or shrink under the stairs. She moved with the kind of composure money couldn't buy. And that unnerved every powerful man and woman in that hall. Richard cleared his throat and raised his voice, trying to recover control. Well, look who decided to join us. Our very own housemaid. I hope you're enjoying yourself among such distinguished company." A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd, shallow and uneasy. People wanted to laugh with Richard, but something about the way Naomi stood there, tall, graceful, unflinching, made it hard. She simply smiled, not mockingly, not nervously, but like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. No one knew the truth yet. No one knew that Naomi Carter hadn't come here tonight to be humiliated. She had come to end Richard Vance's empire. Because Naomi wasn't always invisible. 15 years earlier, she was Naomi Carter, daughter of Anthony Carter, a respected businessman whose investment firm gave opportunities to hundreds of working families. Her father was one of the few black men who had built a name on Wall Street, a man known for honesty in an ocean of sharks. Naomi had been on track to follow him. Law school, internships, summers spent shadowing her father at meetings. She belonged in ballrooms like this. She had grown up in them. But all of it had collapsed in a single year. Her father was accused of fraud, dragged through courts on charges that later proved false. But too late to save him. His company was gutted and sold for scraps. His name was ruined. And within months he was gone, dead of a heart attack at 53. Naomi, 21 and 7 months pregnant, was left abandoned by the man who had promised to stand beside her when the money was still there. The name Carter became a stain. The doors that once opened with smiles slammed shut. She dropped out of law school. She scraped by with whatever job she could find. Years blurred together. And eventually, she ended up in Richard Vance's mansion, cleaning the house of the very man who had orchestrated her father's downfall. Richard never recognized her. To him, she was invisible. Just another uniform, another pair of hands that scrubbed his empire clean. But Naomi saw everything. And she remembered everything. 2 years ago, she stopped being just a maid. She started listening, watching, documenting. The conversations he thought no one heard, the files carelessly left open, the bribes and deals he whispered into late-night calls. Slowly, quietly, she built a case brick by brick. And tonight was the night the walls would fall. Naomi's eyes scanned the crowd as she reached the last step. Somewhere in the corner, she knew, a camera lens was pointed at her. Somewhere else, a journalist she once trusted was waiting for her signal. Her hand brushed the small clutch at her side, where a recorder rested next to documents that could destroy everything Richard had built. She smiled again, that same quiet, unsettling smile. Tonight wasn't about blending in. Tonight was about reminding Richard Vance who she really was. Back in her small apartment in Queens, just 24 hours before the gala, Naomi had stared at the golden envelope lying on her kitchen table. It glowed under the dim lamp like a cruel joke, mocking everything she had endured. She turned it over in her hands again and again, as if the weight of the card might change her decision. Her daughter, Lila, was curled up on the couch, crayons spread around her, humming softly as she drew. She was only 8 years old, with bright eyes that seemed too wise for her age. She noticed everything, even the heaviness in her mother's silence. "Mommy," Lila said, setting down her crayon. "Why are you looking at that paper like it's bad?" Naomi forced a smile. "It's not bad, sweetheart. Just complicated." "Is it important?" Lila asked, tilting her head. "Yes," Naomi whispered. "Very important." She brushed Lila's curls back gently, trying not to let her daughter see the storm inside. Because the truth was, this invitation wasn't just a joke Richard Vance wanted to play. It was a challenge. And Naomi wasn't about to back down. She remembered another life, one Lila had never seen. A life of private schools, charity galas, summer trips abroad. A life where she walked through ballrooms not as the help but as the daughter of Anthony Carter, a man who dared to rise in a world stacked against him. Naomi still remembered her father's voice, calm and steady, telling her that power wasn't in money or titles but in character. He believed in honesty in a place that thrived on deceit. And for that, he was punished. The charges that destroyed him had been orchestrated by Richard Vance. Naomi had discovered that much while cleaning his office, overhearing late-night conversations, piecing together fragments of old files. Richard had wanted Carter investments gone so he could buy their assets for pennies. Naomi's father died trying to clear his name. And Richard walked away richer. Naomi carried that wound every day. But she carried something else too, purpose. For the past 3 years, while Richard dismissed her as invisible, Naomi had been gathering proof. She kept a shoebox hidden in her closet filled with flash drives, photographs, and recordings. She had captured Richard's deals with crooked politicians, bribes disguised as donations, even his offshore accounts. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit on her bed with the shoebox open, Lila asleep in the next room, and whisper to herself, one day the truth will come out. The week before the gala, she had picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in nearly 10 years. "Daniel Ross," the voice answered. He sounded older, sharper, but still familiar. "It's Naomi," she said quietly. The silence on the other end lasted so long she thought the line had dropped. Finally, he breathed out. "Naomi Carter? My God! I thought you disappeared." "I had to," she said. "But I've been working. I've been collecting everything." Daniel was now an investigative journalist at a major newspaper. Back in law school, he had been her study partner, her friend, the one person who believed she would one day change the system. She could still hear the disbelief in his voice as she told him what she had found. "Do you still have your contacts in the FBI?" she asked. "Yes," he said cautiously. "But Naomi, this is huge. You're talking about one of the most powerful men in the city." "I know," she replied. "That's why I've waited. I needed enough to not just accuse him, but bury him." They arranged everything carefully. Hidden cameras at the gala. Journalists planted among the guests. Federal agents standing by once the evidence went public. Naomi had spent years waiting, and now the stage was set. The night before the event, she opened her closet and pulled out the only dress she had saved from her past life. A simple black Armani, her 21st birthday gift from her father. It was the last piece of that world she still owned. She held it up against her body in the mirror, and for the first time in years, she saw not a maid, not a widow of circumstance, but the woman she was meant to be. Lila padded into the room, rubbing her eyes. "Are you going to wear that tomorrow?" "Yes, baby," Naomi said softly, her voice catching. "Tomorrow, I'm going to remind them who I am." Lila hugged her leg. "You'll look like a queen." Naomi bent down and kissed her daughter's forehead. "No, sweetheart. Tomorrow, I'll look like the truth." The lights in the ballroom glittered like stars trapped inside glass. Naomi stood at the bottom of the staircase, her black Armani dress fitting her like a memory reclaimed. For a moment, she felt her father's presence, steady, proud, as though he were walking beside her. The whispers hadn't stopped since she entered. Women in gowns dripping with jewels stared, some in open disdain, others in curious admiration. Men leaned toward each other, murmuring, "Isn't that the maid? Why is she here? She doesn't belong." But Naomi didn't shrink. She moved through the room with calm steps, every inch of her posture announcing that she had been born to stand among them. That confidence unsettled people more than any diamond necklace ever could. Richard Vance finally stepped forward, his smile stretched too wide, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, what a surprise! Our dear Naomi has joined us tonight. I suppose even the staff should experience luxury once in their lives." A few guests chuckled, eager to please him. Others looked away, uncomfortable. Naomi met his gaze and answered simply, "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Vance. It was generous of you to include me." Her tone wasn't sarcastic, it was level, composed. But it cut deeper than mockery, because she refused to play his game. Richard's jaw tightened. He expected her to fumble, to blush, to stumble over her words. Instead, she stood firm, eyes steady, voice calm. It rattled him, though he tried not to show it. Naomi drifted toward the bar, aware of every pair of eyes following her. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from a waiter, holding it with the grace of someone who had done this 100 times before. And in truth, she had. This wasn't her first gala. It was her return. Across the room, a group of older businessmen whispered among themselves. One of them, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, froze mid-sentence. "That's Carter's girl," he muttered to his wife. "Anthony Carter's daughter. I'd know that face anywhere." His wife gasped softly. "But I thought we all did," he said grimly. The murmurs spread. Carter's daughter? The name that Richard had spent years burying was rising again, echoing through the crowd like a ghost refusing to stay silent. Richard raised his glass, desperate to regain control. "Friends, tonight is about celebration, about progress, about the future of Vance Global Enterprises. Let us not be distracted." But Naomi was already moving closer, each step deliberate. She stopped just a few feet from him, her eyes locking on his. "You're right," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the hall. "Tonight is about truth. And the truth has been waiting 15 years. The hall fell silent again. Guests leaned forward, sensing something was about to happen. Richard laughed lightly, trying to brush her off. "Truth? My dear, I think you've confused a charity gala with a courtroom." Naomi tilted her head, her expression calm. "Oh, I haven't confused anything. But perhaps you have. You've confused silence with weakness. You thought because I cleaned your floors, I was invisible. But invisibility has its advantages, Mr. Vance. People reveal their secrets when they think no one is watching." Gasps fluttered through the room. Richard's face darkened. "That's enough. Security." But before he could finish, Naomi reached into her clutch. She pulled out a slim folder, its edges worn from being handled so often. She held it up, her hand steady. "In this folder are documents, recordings, photographs, proof of what you've done. Proof of how you destroyed my father, Anthony Carter, with false charges so you could steal his company. Proof of your bribes, your offshore accounts, your lies. A murmur swept through the guests. Cameras flashed. Phones discreetly raised, recording every word. Richard barked a laugh, but his voice wavered. Lies! This is absurd. No one here will believe a maid over me. Naomi's eyes burned with quiet fire. Then let them decide for themselves. She pressed a small button on the recorder she had carried into the room. Richard's own voice filled the hall, clear and damning. Transfer the funds to the Cayman account. The senator will make sure the bill dies in committee. No one can trace it back. The crowd erupted. Gasps, whispers, shouts. Richard's face drained of color. He looked around wildly, but everywhere he turned, phones were capturing his downfall. Naomi's gaze never wavered. For years you thought I was nothing. Tonight I am everything you fear. The ballroom was no longer a celebration, it was a courtroom. Phones hovered in the air, flashes went off like lightning, and every eye was fixed on Richard Vance, the untouchable king suddenly stripped of his crown. Richard raised his hands, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a plea. This is nonsense. Audio can be faked. Anyone can stitch together recordings these days. But Naomi didn't flinch. She lifted her chin and pulled another slip of paper from the folder. Perhaps. But what about documents? Contracts signed with your own hand? Bank transfers tied to shell companies in your brother's name? Offshore accounts under Vance Global Holdings? She held the papers up, her voice unwavering. I cleaned your office. I dusted your shelves. And in your arrogance, you left pieces of your empire lying in plain sight. I collected them all. Every deal, every lie, every crime. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The older businessman who had recognized her earlier stepped forward, his voice breaking. Anthony Carter's daughter. I knew it. Your father was an honest man. He never deserved what happened. Naomi's eyes softened for the first time that night. Thank you. My father died trying to prove his innocence. But he never got the chance. Tonight I will give him that chance. Richard's mask was crumbling. His face was pale, sweat shining under the chandelier light. You think anyone here cares about your father? Business is business. He was in the way of something bigger. He wasn't strong enough. The words slipped out before he could stop them. And that was when the second voice cut through the hall. Strong enough to expose you. The crowd turned. From the corner stepped Daniel Ross, dressed as one of the event photographers, camera in hand. He lowered it and held up a press badge. Daniel Ross, investigative journalist. And to everyone watching, yes, you heard Richard Vance admit what he did. Richard's eyes widened. Watching? Daniel's smile was grim. That's right. This gala has been live streaming for the past 20 minutes. Every guest, every camera, every hidden microphone. You're not just performing for these people, Richard. You're performing for the entire country. Chaos erupted. Guests shouted over one another, some trying to edge toward the exits, others whispering frantically, worried their own dealings might be exposed next. A few of Richard's closest allies turned their backs on him instantly, stepping away as though he carried a contagious disease. Naomi didn't move. She reached into her clutch again and pulled out a small envelope. This contains a summary of 2 years' worth of evidence. Hundreds of hours of recordings. Dozens of documents. Enough to bury not just you, Richard, but every partner who thought they could hide behind your power. Richard lunged toward her, desperation twisting his face. Give me that! But before he reached her, a sharp command cut through the chaos. FBI! Step aside! Agents in dark suits flooded into the ballroom. The lead agent strode forward, his voice ringing against the marble. Richard Vance, you are under arrest for fraud, money laundering, bribery, and conspiracy. The crowd gasped as handcuffs snapped around Richard's wrists. He tried to shout, to protest, but his words drowned under the weight of his downfall. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing the moment the Titan fell. Naomi exhaled for the first time that night. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes never left Richard's. She stepped closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "You thought I was invisible. You thought my father's truth could be buried. But the truth always finds its way out. Always." Richard's face twisted with fury, but his voice cracked as the agents dragged him toward the exit. "You'll regret this, Naomi. You think justice makes you powerful? You're nothing without me." She didn't flinch. "I was never nothing. You just refused to see me." As Richard was led out of the ballroom, the crowd erupted again, some voices cheering, others panicked. But Naomi stood still, her figure calm against the storm, the quiet center of the chaos. Daniel approached, his camera still hanging from his neck. "It's done," he said softly. "You did it. He's finished." Naomi looked around at the stunned faces, the broken empire collapsing before her eyes. And for the first time in 15 years, she felt the weight of injustice lift from her shoulders. But she knew this wasn't just about revenge. It never had been. This was about clearing her father's name. About proving that the truth mattered. About showing her daughter that strength wasn't in cruelty, but in resilience. Naomi straightened her shoulders. The night wasn't over yet. There was still one final truth to deliver. The ballroom emptied slowly after Richard's arrest, the hum of frantic whispers fading into the marble corridors. Naomi stood at the center of it all, steady as the storm passed. She didn't need to raise her voice or chase applause. Truth had spoken loud enough. Later that night, in the quiet of Daniel's office, Naomi placed the last of her evidence onto his desk. Folders, drives, photographs, years of secrets carried in silence. Daniel studied them with wide eyes, his voice low. "Naomi, this is bigger than him. These files, half the city's power brokers are in here. You realize what you've done?" Naomi sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over her. "I realize I've waited too long. My father deserves his name back. My daughter deserves to grow up knowing the truth matters." Daniel nodded, determination replacing his shock. "Then we'll make sure the world sees this." And the world did. Within a week, headlines screamed across every paper and news site. Richard Vance empire collapses. Evidence reveals decades of fraud and bribery. Anthony Carter cleared posthumously. Family redemption after 15 years. Naomi read the words with trembling hands. Her father's photograph, once attached to lies and disgrace, now shone beside words like honorable, visionary, innocent. The name Carter, once buried under shame, was finally restored. Lila sat beside her at the kitchen table, swinging her legs, a coloring book in front of her. "Mommy?" "Yes, baby." "Did they tell everyone Grandpa was good?" Naomi smiled, her eyes wet. "Yes. They told the whole world." "Then he knows, right? Up in heaven?" Naomi pulled her daughter into her arms. "Yes, sweetheart. He knows." The following month, Naomi stood in front of a different crowd, not billionaires in glittering gowns, but families, teachers, workers, people who had been silenced or cheated by men like Richard. Behind her, a banner stretched across the wall, the Carter Justice Foundation. She gripped the podium, her voice calm but strong. "For too long, people like my father were destroyed because they stood for honesty. For too long, the powerful thought they could silence the truth. But tonight, we begin something new. This foundation is for the invisible, for the ones overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. Because invisibility," she paused, her eyes scanning the faces before her, "can be our greatest strength. When they don't see us coming, we see them for who they really are. And when the truth arrives, it cannot be ignored." Applause filled the hall, not polite claps, but thunderous, heartfelt approval. Naomi's heart swelled. She wasn't just avenging the past. She was building a future. Afterward, Daniel found her in the crowd. He handed her a folded paper, his expression soft. "The federal court just cleared the last of the charges. Officially, your father's record is clean. They even called him a victim of malicious prosecution." Naomi held the paper to her chest, tears spilling freely. For the first time in 15 years, the weight was gone. That evening, she and Lila walked through the streets of Manhattan hand in hand. The city lights glowed above them, alive and buzzing, but Naomi felt a deep peace she hadn't known in years. Lila tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, are we rich now?" Naomi laughed quietly. "No, baby. But we're free. And that's better than rich." They stopped in front of a tall building, Richard's old headquarters, now stripped of his name. A "for sale" sign hung across the glass doors. Naomi stared at it for a moment, then shook her head. "I don't need this anymore," she whispered. "Power built on lies always crumbles." Lila leaned against her side. "Then what do we need?" Naomi knelt down, cupping her daughter's face. "We need the truth. We need each other. That's real power." As they continued down the street, the weight of the past finally behind them, Naomi felt the future open wide. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was exactly who she was meant to be, the daughter of a good man, the mother of a brave girl, and the woman who proved that justice always finds its way home. And somewhere, in the quiet spaces of her heart, she knew her father was walking beside her again, proud and unbroken.